So there I was, Jake Morrison, minding my own damn business in the middle of nowhere space, hauling a shipment of Synthi beef to the Outer Rim colonies. Just another Tuesday in my glamorous life as a freelance cargo hauler. The pay was decent, the company was non-existent, and my biggest worry was whether my coffee maker would survive another hyperspace jump without exploding. Simple times. Then my proximity alarm started screaming like a banshee with its tail caught in a warp drive. Aria, what's got the sensors in a twist? I called out to my ship's AI, because talking to yourself in space is totally normal and not at all a sign of impending madness. 3 Vexstar battlecruisers approaching fast, Jake. And before you ask, no, they're not here for the Synthi beef. Vexstar are strict carnivores who prefer their meat still screaming. Fantastic. The Vexstar are basically what you'd get if you crossed a Komodo dragon with a professional wrestler and gave the result anger management issues. 8 feet tall, covered in scales that could deflect small arms fire, and equipped with teeth that could open cans and probably bank vaults. They're the kind of species that makes humans look like particularly fragile houseplants. Jake Morrison, came a voice over the comm that sounded like gravel being processed through a wood chipper. We are coming aboard. Do not resist. Do not resist. What was I going to do? Throw my coffee mug at them? Sure thing. Mikasa is Sukasa and all that. Just try not to eat me. Okay? The docking clamps engaged with all the subtlety of a meteor impact, and within minutes my cargo bay was full of very large, very agitated lizard people. The leader, who I assume was the one who'd called me, stepped forward. She was carrying what looked like a squirming duffel bag that was making concerning chittering noises. Human, she said, and I could practically hear the capital H in her voice. We have heard of your species' unusual talents. My talents? Lady, I can make instant ramen without burning down the kitchen, and I know all the words to Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm not sure that qualifies as talent so much as basic survival skills and questionable taste in music. She ignored my witty banter, which honestly was pretty rude. We have urgent business. Planetary crisis. Cannot delay. You will care for our young. And with that, she dumped the chittering bag at my feet, along with 5 other similar bags that her companions had been carrying. The bags immediately started moving around like they contained very angry cats. Very angry cats with claws and teeth, and probably a grudge against the universe. Whoa, hold up there, Godzilla. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not a babysitter. I'm a cargo hauler. I transport things, not whatever's in these bags that's trying to eat its way out. You are human, she stated, like that explained everything. Humans are good with young. Galaxy knows this. We return in 7 solar cycles. 7 cycles, that's almost 2 weeks. I don't know the first thing about taking care of alien kids, but they were already heading back to their ships. The leader paused at the airlock. Feed them meat. Do not let them kill each other, or you. Good luck, human Jake Morrison. And then they were gone, leaving me standing in my cargo bay with 6 bags that were now making a sound like a chainsaw convention having a disagreement with a garbage disposal. Aria, I said slowly. Please tell me this is some kind of elaborate prank. Afraid not, Jake. Congratulations. You're now the proud guardian of 6 Vexstar cubs. The good news is they're not fully grown yet, so they probably can't bite through your skull in one go. What's the bad news? They're still Vexstar, and from the sound of things, they're getting hungry. One of the bags had gone ominously quiet, which in my experience is never a good sign when dealing with predators of any age. I stared at the 6 squirming containers, and realized my nice, quiet, boring life had just taken a hard left turn into what could generously be called a survival horror movie. Well, I muttered, this is either going to be the best story I ever tell, or the last one. Against every instinct screaming at me to jettison the bags into space and pretend this never happened, I decided to open one. The quiet one, because clearly, my survival instincts were taking a coffee break. The moment I unzipped it, a scaled missile launched itself at my face. I ducked, and what I can only describe as a miniature dragon with anger issues landed on my cargo crates. It was about the size of a house cat, if house cats had razor-sharp claws, a mouth full of needle teeth, and the attitude of a particularly vindictive honey badger. Okay, hello there, little guy, I said, backing away slowly. Or girl, or however your species works. I'm Jake, and apparently I'm your babysitter for the next 2 weeks. The cub tilted its head, studying me with golden eyes that held way too much intelligence for something that probably wasn't even potty trained. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound like a miniature chainsaw starting up. I'm going to call you Snappy, I decided. The other bags were getting more agitated, so I figured I might as well commit to this insanity. 5 more zippers later, and my cargo bay looked like a reptile store had exploded. 6 Vexter cubs were now loose on my ship, and they immediately began what I can only describe as a tactical assessment of their new environment, which is a fancy way of saying they started destroying everything within reach. Cub number 2 went straight for my tool rack and began methodically testing whether my wrenches were edible. "You're bitey," I announced. Original, I know, but when you're potentially about to be eaten by baby dinosaurs, creativity takes a backseat to basic survival. The third cub, smaller than the others, just sat in the corner and watched everything with those unsettling golden eyes. The strong, silent type. Chompers, I decided, because something told me still waters run deep, and probably very, very bitey. Cub 4 was apparently powered by some kind of perpetual motion machine, bouncing off walls, crates, and my rapidly diminishing sanity. Scratchy, because you're making me want to scratch my eyes out. The fifth one was making a sound that could generously be called giggling, if giggles usually made people think of horror movie soundtracks. Giggles. Perfect. And the last one was definitely not the smallest, despite being the last out of the bag. This one was easily twice the size of the others, and was currently investigating whether my spare parts cabinet could be opened by applied force. Spoiler alert, it could. "And you're tiny," I said weakly, watching Tiny casually bend a steel support beam while investigating what was behind it. "Jake," Oria's voice cut through the sound of my ship being systematically dismantled, "your life support systems are showing some concerning readings." Define concerning. "Well, your atmospheric recycler just gained 6 new biological signatures, your power consumption has increased by 30% due to enhanced climate control needs, and something just chewed through your backup communications array." I looked around and spotted Bitey with cable fragments hanging from his mouth like technological spaghetti. "Bitey, no, bad predator. We don't eat the communications equipment." Bitey looked at me, tilted his head in a way that somehow managed to be both cute and terrifying, and then deliberately bit through another cable while maintaining eye contact. It was a power move that would have made a mob boss proud. "Oria, how exactly am I supposed to keep them from destroying the ship?" Well, traditional parenting usually involves setting boundaries, establishing routines, and providing adequate stimulation for developing minds. These aren't human children, Oria. These are baby apex predators with claws that can cut through steel and apparently no concept of personal property. Then I suggest you figure it out quickly, because Scratchy just discovered your food stores, and I don't think Cynthy beef is going to cut it for growing carnivores. I turned to see Scratchy had indeed found my emergency rations and was currently making a face that suggested Cynthy beef ranks somewhere between cardboard and actual cardboard on the Vexter pallet scale. "Right," I said, watching my carefully ordered life dissolve into chaos around me. "How hard can babysitting be?" Famous last words, as they say in the business. 20 minutes later, I had my answer. Babysitting apex predator cubs is roughly equivalent to juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle through a minefield, during an earthquake, while being attacked by angry wasps. My first brilliant strategy was containment. I figured if I could just get them into the secondary cargo hold, I could seal it off and deal with them one at a time. This plan lasted exactly as long as it took Tiny to casually punch a hole through the bulkhead door I'd just locked. "Okay, plan B," I muttered, stepping over the twisted remains of what used to be a perfectly good airlock seal. Plan B was distraction. I threw some spare parts around, hoping they'd focus on investigating those instead of my increasingly expensive ship components. This worked for about 3 seconds, until Snappy figured out that the moving human was way more interesting than some static metal chunks. Plan C was negotiation. Yes, I tried to reason with baby dinosaurs. Don't judge me. I was running out of options. "Look, kids," I said, as 6 pairs of golden eyes stared at me with unsettling focus, "we need to establish some ground rules here. This is my ship, and some of these things are important for keeping us all alive in the cold vacuum of space." Giggles made that horrifying giggling sound, which I was beginning to suspect was actually laughter at my expense. Pitey demonstrated his understanding of my speech by immediately chomping down on the nearest life support monitor. "Aria, I need backup strategies here. What do human parents do when their kids won't listen?" "Well, timeout is popular. Also bribery, and in extreme cases they call grandparents. I don't think Vexter grandparents are going to be particularly helpful right now, and I'm pretty sure putting apex predators in timeout just makes them angry. Then perhaps you should consider why the adult Vexter thought you specifically could handle this situation." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" "Jake, they didn't just dump their children with the first human they found. They specifically asked for you by name. That suggests they know something about your background that makes you qualified for this job." I thought about that while watching Scratchy attempt to climb the walls. Literally. Those claws weren't just for show. My background. Aria. I'm a cargo hauler. My qualifications include a commercial pilot's license and an encyclopedic knowledge of truck stop coffee, and 6 younger siblings back on Earth. Oh, right, I'd kind of blocked out my childhood, but now that Aria mentioned it, growing up as the oldest of 7 kids in rural Montana had been like running a small military operation. Mom and Dad were always working the ranch, which meant I was basically a full-time babysitter from age 12 onward. That's different, Aria. Those were human children. These are literal baby monsters. Are they though? Look at them, Jake. Really look. I paused in my panic and actually observed the cubs. Snappy was still watching me, but there was something almost curious about the way she tilted her head. Chompers had moved closer and was sitting quietly nearby, like he was waiting for something. Even Beatty had stopped destroying things and was just sort of hovering around the edge of the group. They're pack animals, I realized. They're looking for a leader. And you're the biggest, most dominant presence in their immediate environment. Congratulations, Alpha Jake. Great, just great. I'd gone from cargo hauler to pack leader of baby space dragons in the span of an hour. My career counselor definitely hadn't covered this scenario. But here's the thing about growing up with 6 siblings. You learn that chaos is just order you haven't figured out yet. Tommy used to climb everything until I started giving him specific things to climb. Sarah would bite when she was frustrated until I learned to recognize the warning signs. And little Pete would destroy everything he could reach until I started channeling that energy into building projects instead of demolition. All right, kids, I said. And something in my voice must have changed because all 6 cubs suddenly gave me their complete attention. Snappy, you're clearly the leader of this little pack, so you're my lieutenant. Beatty, you're exploring everything with your teeth, which tells me you're trying to learn about your environment. Chompers, you're the smart one, aren't you? Watching and learning before you act. I pointed to each cub as I spoke, and they actually seemed to be listening. Scratchy, you've got energy to burn and nowhere to put it. Giggles, you're having fun with all this, which means you're probably the social one. And Tiny, you're testing structural integrity, because you need to know what's safe for the pack. Jake, Aria said quietly, your heart rate just dropped to normal levels for the first time since they arrived. She was right. I felt calmer, more in control, like I actually knew what I was doing. Right then. First rule of the pack: we don't destroy things we need to survive. That includes life support, navigation and communications equipment. I looked directly at Beatty. Especially communications equipment. Beatty made a small chirping sound that might have been acknowledgement. Second rule: if you're bored or frustrated, you come to me first before you start tearing things apart. I've got plenty of things you can safely destroy. Scratchy's tail started wagging. I didn't even know Vexter had tails that could wag. And third rule: we're a pack now. Which means we take care of each other. That includes the weird squishy scaleless pack member who apparently knows how to work the food dispensers. Snappy made a sound that was almost like a purr. A terrifying predatory purr, but still. Now then, I said, feeling like I might actually survive this after all. Who wants to hear a story about the time a pack of Earth predators called wolves took down prey 10 times their size? 6 pairs of golden eyes lit up with interest, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to work out after all. Gather around then, I said, settling down on a cargo crate. This is the story of how 25 wolves brought down a creature that weighed more than all of them combined. The cubs arranged themselves in a semicircle around me, with Snappy closest to my left side and Chompers on my right. Tiny sprawled behind the others like a scaly mountain, while Bitey, Scratchy, and Giggles filled in the gaps. It was eerily similar to storytime back home, except my siblings had never had the potential to accidentally decapitate me if they got too excited. Now wolves are pack hunters, just like your species. But unlike Vextar, they're not particularly big or strong individually. An adult wolf weighs maybe 40 kilos soaking wet, but they have something that makes them incredibly dangerous: they work together. Snappy chirped and tilted her head. I was beginning to recognize that as her tell me more gesture. The prey they were hunting was called a moose. Picture a creature twice as tall as me with antlers wider than my outstretched arms, and a kick that could cave in a wolf's skull. One-on-one, a wolf wouldn't stand a chance. I gestured with my hands as I spoke, and noticed the cubs tracking every movement. They weren't just listening, they were studying me, learning from every word and gesture. But wolves are smart. They don't fight fair. They studied this moose for hours, watching how it moved, where it was strongest, where it was vulnerable. Then they split into teams. Some wolves circled around to cut off escape routes. Others stayed back as reserves. And the rest? They went in for the attack. Bitey made an excited clicking sound, his tail twitching with anticipation. The lead wolves went for the legs, trying to slow the moose down. The moose fought back, of course, swinging those massive antlers and kicking with hooves the size of dinner plates. But every time it focused on one threat, another wolf would dart in from a different angle. I stood up and started pacing, acting out the story. The cubs' eyes followed my every move like I was the most fascinating thing in the universe. The key was patience. They didn't try to bring down the moose all at once. They wore it down bit by bit, working as a team. When one wolf got tired, another took its place. When the moose charged one group, the others pressed their attack. It took hours, but eventually, I paused for dramatic effect, and 6 baby predators hung on my every word. The moose went down, and the entire pack shared the victory. The cubs erupted in excited chittering and clicking sounds that I was beginning to recognize as approval. Scratchy was practically vibrating with excitement, while Giggles was making that unsettling sound that was somehow both adorable and terrifying. That's what being a pack means. I continued, sitting back down. It's not about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about working together, trusting each other, and making sure everyone gets taken care of. Chompers, who had been silent throughout the story, suddenly moved closer and rested his head against my leg. It was such a trusting gesture that I felt something tighten in my chest. When was the last time anyone had trusted me like that? Aurea, I said quietly. How long until we reach the next way station? Approximately 18 hours at current speed. But Jake, we might have a problem. The cubs picked up on the change in my tone immediately. Snappy's head snapped up, alert, while Tiny rose to his feet with surprising grace for something his size. What kind of problem? Life support is functioning, but barely. The cubs' metabolic requirements are higher than I initially calculated. We're going to need to reduce power consumption somewhere, or we'll start running low on breathable air. I looked around at the cubs, who were now all watching me with those unsettling golden eyes. They couldn't understand Aurea's words, but they could sense the tension in the air. Can we shut down non-essential systems? Already done. The problem is that 6 growing Vextar cubs consume oxygen at roughly the same rate as 12 adult humans. We're not going to suffocate, but it's going to get uncomfortable. Great. Not only was I responsible for keeping these cubs alive, but now I had to figure out how to do it with limited resources. It was like being back home during the winter when the heating bills got too high and Dad would make us all sleep in the living room to conserve energy. But then I looked at the cubs again, and something clicked. They weren't just passengers on my ship anymore. They were my pack, and packs took care of each other. All right, kids, I said, standing up. We've got a problem, and we're going to solve it together. Aurea, what's the most power-intensive system we can't shut down? Environmental processing. It's working overtime to scrub the air and maintain proper humidity levels. And what would help reduce the load? Lower activity levels would reduce oxygen consumption and heat generation. But Jake, you can't exactly ask them to hibernate. I grinned. No, but I can ask them to help. I turned to face the cubs. Pack meeting. We've got a challenge. The cubs immediately gave me their full attention. It was remarkable how quickly they'd adapted to following my lead. Our den, I gestured around the cargo bay, is having trouble keeping enough good air for all of us. We need to work together to fix this. Tiny, you're the strongest. Can you help me move some of these cargo containers to create better air circulation? Tiny rumbled what I was learning to recognize as agreement, and moved toward the nearest container. With his help we could rearrange the cargo bay to create better airflow patterns. Scratchy, you're fast and agile. I need you to check all the air vents and make sure nothing's blocking them. But carefully, we don't want to damage them. Scratchy chirped excitedly and immediately scrambled up the nearest wall toward the ceiling vents. Bitey, you're good at finding weak points. Help me identify any places where air might be leaking out. For the next 2 hours, we worked together. The cubs threw themselves into the task with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for destroying my ship, except now they were helping fix it. Snappy coordinated the others when I was busy with repairs. Chompers watched everything and pointed out problems I missed. Even Giggles contributed by somehow keeping everyone's spirits up with that disturbing but oddly encouraging giggling. Jake, Aurea said finally. I'm showing improved air circulation efficiency by 23%. Environmental systems are no longer running at maximum capacity. I sat down heavily on a cargo container, suddenly exhausted. The cubs immediately clustered around me, with Snappy and Chompers flanking me like bodyguards while the others settled nearby. "Good work, pack," I said, and meant it. "We did that together." Tiny rumbled contentedly, a sound like distant thunder. Scratchy curled up in a ball near my feet, finally still for the first time since I'd met him. Even Bitey had stopped trying to eat everything and was instead grooming his claws with what looked like satisfaction. As I sat there, surrounded by 6 deadly predators who had somehow become my responsibility and maybe even my family, I realized something had fundamentally changed. These weren't just alien kids I was babysitting anymore. They were my pack, and I was theirs. And for the first time since this whole mess started, that didn't terrify me. It felt right. Aurea, how much longer until their parents get back? 12 more days, Jake. I looked down at Chompers, who had fallen asleep with his head on my lap, and smiled. "You know what? I think we're going to be just fine." I should have known better than to tempt fate like that. In space, as in life, the moment you start feeling comfortable is exactly when the universe decides to remind you that it has a twisted sense of humor and an unlimited supply of creative ways to ruin your day. The proximity alarms went off 6 hours later, jolting all of us awake. The cubs had been napping in a pile around my chair like the world's most dangerous collection of stuffed animals, but they came alert, instantly, golden eyes snapping open and scanning for threats. "Aria, what have we got?" "3 vessels approaching fast. Configuration suggests pirates, Jake. They're not responding to standard identification requests, and they're jamming our long-range communications." "Perfect, space pirates." Because babysitting baby dragons wasn't challenging enough without adding armed criminals to the mix. "Can we outrun them?" "Negative. They're flying interceptors, and we're hauling cargo. They'll overtake us in 12 minutes. The cubs were picking up on my tension, moving restlessly around the cargo bay. Snappy positioned herself between me and the airlock, while Tiny rose to his full height and let out a low rumble that made the deck plates vibrate. "Jake," Aria continued. "Based on their approach pattern and jamming frequency, these are Corbin raiders. They're known for taking hostages and selling exotic species on the black market." My blood ran cold. Exotic species like Vextar cubs. Exactly like Vextar cubs. A single juvenile Vextar sells for more credits than most people see in a lifetime. I looked at my pack, these 6 incredible creatures who had trusted me, followed me, worked with me. The thought of them ending up in cages, sold to collectors or fighting rings, made something savage and protective rise up in my chest. "Not happening," I said firmly. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic screech that echoed through my ship. Heavy footsteps rang against the hull as the pirates made their way to my airlock. "All right, kids," I said quietly. "Remember the wolf story. Sometimes the pack has to protect its territory." The cubs spread out around the cargo bay without me having to tell them, taking positions behind cover with an instinctive understanding of tactics that would have made a military instructor proud. Snappy crouched behind a cargo container near the airlock, while Chompers melted into the shadows by the environmental controls. Bitey and Scratchy found perches on opposite sides of the room that would let them attack from above. Giggles positioned herself near the emergency supplies, and Tiny placed himself directly behind me like a scaly mountain of protective fury. The airlock cycled open, and 3 figures in mismatched combat armor swaggered into my cargo bay. They were armed with energy weapons and had the cocky confidence of predators who thought they were at the top of the food chain. "Well, well," said the leader. A scarred human with more cybernetic implants than original parts. "Jake Morrison. We've been looking for you. Sorry to disappoint, but I'm not taking visitors today. You might want to try the next ship over." The pirate laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Funny guy. We got word from our Vextar contacts that you're carrying some very valuable cargo. 6 little bundles of credits just waiting to be collected." The second pirate, some kind of insectoid alien with too many arms, clicked his mandibles together. "Boss says we take the human alive too. Apparently he's got a reputation now. The human cub whisperer, could be useful, so my reputation was already spreading." Fantastic. I'd gone from anonymous cargo hauler to galactic celebrity, and it was about to get me and my pack killed. "Here's how this is going to work," the leader continued, raising his weapon. "You're going to hand over those cubs nice and peaceful like, and we might let you keep enough limbs to pilot us to the nearest market." I felt Tiny tense behind me, heard the soft sound of claws extending from the shadows where the other cubs were hidden. They were waiting for my signal, trusting me to know when to act. "You know," I said conversationally. "I've got a better idea." "Oh yeah, what's that?" I smiled. And it wasn't a nice smile. "How about you get the hell off my ship before you find out why even apex predators trust me with their young." The leader's laugh cut off abruptly as Snappy rose up behind him like a scaled nightmare. She didn't attack, not yet, but the soft sound of her claws scraping against the deck plating was unmistakable. All three pirates spun around, weapons raised, just in time to see Chompers drop from the ceiling vent he'd somehow climbed into. He landed silently behind the insectoid, close enough that his breath fogged the alien's environmental suit. "What the hell?" the third pirate, another human, started to say, but his words died as Scratchy and Bitey revealed themselves on either side of the group, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. Giggles chose that moment to make her signature sound, that horrifying giggle echoing from the shadows. All three pirates jerked their weapons toward the sound, but she was already gone, invisible in the maze of cargo containers. And then Tiny stepped out from behind me. The effect was immediate and profound. Three armed, experienced pirates suddenly found themselves surrounded by 6 juvenile apex predators, and their bravado evaporated like atmosphere through a hull breach. "Oh spit," whispered the leader, which showed admirable restraint considering the circumstances. "Here's the thing about pack hunters," I said, stepping forward. "They don't just work together, they communicate. And right now my pack is telling me that you three represent a threat to our territory and our family." I began to pace, just like I had during story time, and the cubs moved with me, maintaining their positions around the pirates like a living cage. Now, I could give them the signal to attack. Vextar cubs might be young, but they're still Vextar. Those claws can cut through your armor like tissue paper, and those teeth can bite through reinforced steel. The insectoid pirate made a chittering sound that might have been fear. His weapon was shaking in his multiple hands. "But I'm not going to do that," I continued. "You know why? Because I'm not just their pack leader, I'm their teacher, and the lesson for today is about mercy." I stopped pacing and looked directly at the lead pirate. "You came here to take my family and sell them. That makes you worse than predators. Predators kill for food, for territory, for survival. You kill for profit. You're parasites." The cubs were absolutely still now, waiting. The pirates were sweating, trying to track 6 separate threats while listening to me talk. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and I was just getting started. "But here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to walk back to your ships, very slowly, very carefully. You're going to spread the word that Jake Morrison and his pack are off limits. And in return, I won't let my family teach you why the Vextar are considered the apex predators of 3 different star systems." "You're bluffing," the leader said, but his voice cracked on the words. I smiled again, and this time I let some of that savage protectiveness show in my expression. "Snappy, demonstration." Snappy moved so fast she was barely a blur. 1 second she was 5 meters away from the nearest pirate. The next she was beside him, and his weapon was in 3 pieces on the deck, cut through by claws that had moved too quickly for the human eye to follow. The pirate stared at the remains of his gun, then at Snappy, who had already returned to her position without making a sound. "That was her being gentle," I said. "Would you like to see what happens when she's not?" The answer was a unanimous and immediate no. "Smart choice. Now, as I was saying, you're going to leave. But first you're going to transfer half your ship's energy cells to my cargo hold, as payment for the inconvenience of being boarded by idiots." "That's piracy," the insectoid protested. "No," I said, "that's a tuition fee. Consider it payment for the valuable lesson you're about to learn about not messing with pack animals." 10 minutes later, the pirates were gone, along with half their power reserves and all of their dignity. The cubs had escorted them to the airlock in what could generously be called a honor guard formation, if honor guards typically looked like they were deciding which limb to bite off first. As soon as the airlock sealed, the cubs converged on me in a celebratory pile. Snappy nuzzled against my shoulder with a purring sound, while Tiny rumbled his approval. Even Chompers seemed pleased, making soft chittering sounds that I was learning meant contentment. "Araya," I said, scratching behind Bitey's head fins, "remind me to update my insurance policy when we get back to civilization." "Jake, I've been monitoring galactic communication networks. Word of this incident is already spreading. 3 different news services are running stories about the human who commands apex predators." I groaned. "Please tell me they're not using my real name." "They're using your real name. Also your ship's registration, your employment history, and someone apparently tracked down your elementary school graduation photo." Perfect. I'd gone from anonymous cargo hauler to galactic celebrity to living legend in the span of 2 weeks. At this rate, I'd probably have my own reality show by the time the cubs' parents got back. But as I sat there, surrounded by my pack, feeling the warm weight of Chompers settled against my side and listening to the contented sounds of the others, I realized something important. I didn't care about the fame or the attention. or the fact that my quiet life was probably over forever. These cubs had become my family, and I'd do whatever it took to protect them. Araya, how much longer, until the parents return? 5 more days, Jake. I looked around at my pack, these incredible creatures who had turned my life upside down in the best possible way, and smiled. You know what, I hope they're not in too much of a hurry. 5 days later, I was beginning to understand why parents get attached to their kids, even when those kids are capable of accidentally dismembering you during a particularly enthusiastic game of tag. The cubs had settled into a routine that was almost domestic. If you could call sharing breakfast with 6 apex predators domestic. Snappy had appointed herself my personal bodyguard and advisor, rarely leaving my side except when pack business required her attention elsewhere. Chompers had become my co-pilot of sorts, sitting quietly in the cockpit and somehow intuiting when I needed help with calculations or system monitoring. Bitey had channeled his destructive tendencies into maintenance work, using those incredible claws to make precision repairs I never could have managed alone. Scratchy had discovered that my ship's exercise equipment made excellent climbing apparatus and had turned the cargo bay into his personal gymnasium. Giggles had somehow figured out how to work the entertainment system and was currently obsessed with Earth-nature documentaries, particularly the ones about predators. And Tiny had become the ship's unofficial security chief, conducting regular patrols and generally making sure everything was running smoothly. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were crew. Hell, they were family. Which made it that much harder when the proximity alarms announced the arrival of 3 Vextar battlecruisers exactly on schedule. The cubs perked up immediately, recognizing the energy signatures of their parents' ships. But instead of the excited reunion behavior I expected, they clustered around me with what could only be described as protective postures. It's okay, I told them, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it myself. Your parents are back. They're going to take you home. Snappy made a soft questioning chirp and tilted her head toward the airlock, then back to me. The message was clear. What about our pack? Jake Morrison, came the familiar gravel through a wood chipper voice over the comm. We are coming aboard. Come on in, I replied, standing up. The cubs formed a loose formation around me, not aggressive, but definitely unified in their stance. The airlock cycled open, and the same Vextar female who had dumped the cubs on me 2 weeks ago strode into my cargo bay, followed by several other adults I didn't recognize. They stopped short when they saw the scene before them. 6 cubs, arranged in perfect pack formation around one human, all of them calm, alert, and obviously healthy. More than healthy, actually. They looked confident, competent, and somehow more mature than when they'd arrived. You. The lead Vextar paused, studying the group with those unsettling golden eyes. You are all well. Better than well, I said. They're incredible. Smart, brave, loyal. You should be proud. We are, she said simply. But we are also confused. Our young ones do not typically bond so completely with other species. Yet the reports we have received. Reports. A second Vextar stepped forward, this one wearing what looked like official insignia. Jake Morrison, you have become something of a legend in the past 2 weeks. The incident with the Corbin Raiders has been broadcast across 17 star systems. The footage of you and our cubs working together to defend your ship has been viewed over 2 billion times. Footage. I looked at Arya's camera array. Arya, you recorded that. Standard security protocol, Jake, though I may have accidentally transmitted it to the galactic news networks during the communication jamming. Technical glitch, completely unintentional. Right. Technical glitch. My AI had turned me into a viral video star and she was playing innocent. The point is, the official continued, your reputation has spread far beyond what we anticipated. We have received over 3,000 requests from various species, asking if you would be willing to provide child care services for their young. I blinked. 3,000. The Zenthari want you to teach their hatchlings about pack tactics. The Morphic Council has offered you a permanent position as Youth Development Specialist. And the Galactic Pediatric Association wants to award you their highest honor for interspecies child care excellence. This was getting out of hand. I looked down at the cubs, who were listening to this conversation with obvious intelligence and growing amusement. Giggles was making that signature sound that meant she found something particularly entertaining. I appreciate the offers, I said carefully, but I'm just a cargo hauler who got lucky. These cubs are special. They made this work, not me. The lead Vextar stepped closer, and I noticed that all 6 cubs tensed slightly, moving almost imperceptibly to better defensive positions. They weren't threatening their parent, but they were making it clear that their primary loyalty now lay elsewhere. You do not understand, she said softly. In our species, cubs do not typically survive their first separation from the pack. The mortality rate for young Vextar placed in temporary care is nearly 60%. They become despondent, stop eating, sometimes die of what you humans call a broken heart. She gestured to the cubs. Look at them. They are not just alive, they are thriving. They have grown, learned, bonded. They have become a new kind of pack, one that includes a being from another species entirely. This is unprecedented in our history. I felt a warm glow of pride, followed immediately by a stab of loss. They were going home. My pack was being broken up, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. However, the official Vextar continued, there is another option. What kind of option? The cubs are old enough to choose their own path. In our culture, once a young Vextar has proven themselves capable of independent survival and pack formation, they may decide whether to return to their birth pack or establish a new one. I looked at the cubs, who were now looking at me with an intensity that was both flattering and terrifying. Are you saying? We are saying that if they choose to remain with you, we will honor that choice. You would be formally recognized as pack leader, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, including, she paused meaningfully, the legal authority to accept or decline requests for your services. The cubs were vibrating with excitement now, making soft chittering sounds and nudging closer to me. Snappy looked up at me with those golden eyes and made a sound that was unmistakably a question. What do you guys think? I asked them. Want to stick together, keep this pack going? The response was immediate and unanimous. 6 cubs erupted into excited chirping, tail wagging, and what could only be described as celebration. Tiny rumbled so loudly that the deck plates vibrated, while Scratchy started doing victory laps around the cargo bay. I think that's a yes, I said, grinning so wide my face hurt. Then it is settled, the lead Vextar said, and there was unmistakable pride in her voice. You are now officially pack leader to 6 Vextar cubs. May your hunt be successful and your den secure. After the parents left, I sat down heavily on my favorite cargo crate, still processing what had just happened. The cubs immediately piled around me in their usual formation, but there was something different about it now. More relaxed, more permanent. Arya, please tell me you're not going to transmit this conversation to the galactic news networks. Too late, Jake. It's already trending under the hashtag interspecies family goals. You've also got 17 interview requests, a book deal offer, and someone wants to make a documentary about your life. I groaned and buried my face in my hands. Chompers nuzzled against my shoulder in sympathy. Oh, and Jake, you might want to check your communication console. You've got some new business inquiries. I looked at the flashing message indicator with resignation. How many? 437. And counting. I looked around at my pack, these incredible creatures who had turned my quiet, boring life into something I never could have imagined. Snappy was already studying the communication console with interest, while Bitey was investigating the new cargo containers the parents had left behind, which apparently contained proper Vextar food and supplies. You know what? I said finally. I think we're going to need a bigger ship. Giggles made her signature sound, and for the first time I realized it really was laughter. She was laughing at the absurdity of our situation, at the cosmic joke that had turned a simple cargo run into a life-changing adventure. And you know what? I started laughing too. 3 months later, I was piloting a custom-built ship designed specifically for interspecies childcare, with my 6 cubs serving as my crew. We just finished our 3rd successful assignment, helping a group of crystalline entities learn how to socialize their young, and we're heading to our next job, teaching pack dynamics to a species of sentient plants. My business cards, professionally printed and everything, read Morrison's Interspecies Family Services, no species too dangerous, no challenge too complex, and in smaller print at the bottom, formerly, Jake Morrison, cargo hauler. Still not sure how this happened. The cubs loved the cards, especially the part where I'd had to list all 6 of them as co-directors of operations, after they'd made it clear that this was a pack business, not a sole proprietorship. As I watched Snappy and Chompers coordinate our approach to the next system while Bitey, Scratchy, Giggles and Tiny handled various ship functions with the competence of trained professionals, I realized something important. I'd started this adventure as a simple cargo hauler, who just wanted to make an honest living moving things from point A to point B. I'd ended up as the galaxy's first professional interspecies family counselor, with a pack of apex predators as my business partners, and a reputation that had spread to every corner of known space. And honestly, I couldn't be happier. Arya, what's our ETA to the Verdanian system? 6 hours, Jake. And you've got another 200 service requests waiting in the queue. I leaned back in my pilot's chair and smiled, listening to the comfortable sounds of my pack working around me. Set course for Verdania. We've got work to do. After all, the galaxy's children weren't going to raise themselves. And apparently there was no one better qualified for the job than a human cargo hauler and his pack of baby space dragons. Who would have thought?